Court, attention. All rise. Superior Court, number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilma Heath presiding.
You may now be seated. The State of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor.
Clerk, draw a jury.
Jury, please enter. Jeremy, Katie, Danny, John, AJ, Sydney, Irene, Tessa, and Michael. You're all here to be the jurors in this case. Will you please kindly take instructions from Judge Heath?
Ladies and gentlemen, you are the jurors who will try this case. At its close, you will vote upon your verdict. I instruct you to listen to the testimony carefully and to the best of your integrity and ability. You are to determine whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty in the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. The district attorney will now proceed.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. On the 16th of January, near midnight, when the lights of Broadway blazed an electric dawn over the festive crowds below, the body of a man came hurtling through space and crashed, a disfigured mess at the foot of the Faulkner building. That body had belonged to Sweden's great financier, Bjorn Faulkner. Now, he fell 50 stories from his penthouse apartment. A suicide, we were told. A great man unwilling to bend before his imminent ruin. You see, only a few months ago, behind every major transaction of gold in the world, stood that well-known figure. Young, tall, with an arrogant smile, with kingdoms and nations in the palm of one hand, and a whip in the other. If gold is the world's lifeblood, then, ladies and gentlemen, Bjorn Faulkner, holding the secrets to all of its dark, hidden arteries, regulating its ebb and flow, was the heart of the world. And, ladies and gentlemen, the world has just had a heart attack. No one knew about the gigantic swindle that lay at the foundation of Faulkner Enterprises. Only days after his death, the entire earth shook from the crash of his business when that monstrous heart stopped beating. Bjorn Faulkner had had a hard struggle to face in the world. But, ladies and gentlemen, he had a much harder struggle to face within his own heart, a struggle which this trial will have to illuminate. You see, two women ruled his life and his death. Here is one of them, Karen Andre, Faulkner's efficient secretary and notorious mistress. But only a few months ago, Faulkner came to America to get a loan and save his fortune, and instead fate sent him the means to save his own heart, in the person of the lovely young lady who is now his widow, Nancy Lee Faulkner, daughter of our great philanthropist, John Graham Whitfield. Now, Faulkner thought he had found salvation in the virtuous innocence of his young bride, and the best proof of that is that just 2 weeks after his wedding, he dismissed his secretary, Karen Andre. He was through with her, but, ladies and gentlemen, one is not easily through with a woman like Karen Andre. Now, we can only guess at what kind of hatred and revenge smoldered within her heart, but it leapt into flame on the night of January 16th. Bjorn Faulkner did not kill himself. He was murdered. Murdered by the very delicate and yet very capable hands that you see here before you. The hands that lifted Bjorn Faulkner high above the world. The hands that threw him down from his greater height into the cold, hard pavement below. Just as cold and hard as this woman's heart. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are going to prove. Our first witness will be Dr. Kirkland. Dr. Kirkland? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Kindly state your name
Dr. Agnes Kirkland,
and your occupation.
medical examiner of this county.
In the course of your duties, what were you called upon to do on the night of January 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
And what did you find?
A body, mangled to an extreme degree.
What did you determine to be the cause of death?
A fall from a great height.
Now, approximately how long after this fall did you arrive to examine the body?
I reached the body about half an hour after the fall.
Judging by the condition of the body, could you tell exactly how long it had been dead for?
No, I could not. Owing to the cold weather, the blood had coagulated immediately, which makes the difference of several hours impossible to detect.
Therefore, it is possible that Faulkner could have been dead for longer than half an hour.
It is possible.
Could you tell if his death could have been caused by anything other than the fall?
I found no evidence of it.
For instance, had his skull been crushed before his fall, would you have been able to tell it by examining the body?
No, owing to the condition of the body, it would be impossible to determine.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions.
Did you find any trace of any such earlier wounds during your examination of the body, Dr. Kirkland?
No, I did not.
And did you find any indication the death could be caused by anything other than the fall?
No, I did not.
That is all.
Thank you, Dr. Kirkland. You may now leave the witness stand.
John Hutchins. John Hutchins? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Your name
John Joseph Hutchins, ma'am.
and your occupation?
I'm the night watchman at the Faulkner building, ma'am.
Did Mr. Faulkner have business offices in that building?
Yes, ma'am, he did.
And who owned the penthouse on the roof of the building?
Mr. Faulkner did.
Who lived there?
Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre. That is, before the marriage.
And who lived there after Mr. Faulkner's marriage?
Just Miss Andre.
Did you ever see Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage?
Yes, ma'am, once.
And when was that?
On the night of January 16th.
Would you kindly tell us about it?
Well, it was about 10:30.
How did you know the time?
My shift starts at 10. It was no more than half an hour later.
I see.
The doorbell rang and I went to answer the door. It was Miss Andre. Mr. Faulkner was with her. It was strange. Miss Andre has her own key. Normally, she opens the door herself.
Was Mr. Faulkner alone with Miss Andre?
No, ma'am. There were two other men with them.
And who were they?
I don't know, ma'am.
Could you describe them for the jury?
Well, they were tall and slender, the both of them. One had sharp cheekbones, as I remember. The other, I couldn't see his face at all on account of his hat being all crooked over his face. He must have had a bit too much, meaning no disrespect. Okay?
And just what do you mean by that?
Well, he was a bit intoxicated. He wasn't very steady on his feet. Mr. Faulkner and the other man had to help him. They almost dragged him into the elevator.
Did Mr. Faulkner seem to be in fairly good spirits when you saw him?
Martin, yes, he seemed quite happy.
Did he look like a man contemplating suicide?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
What about the others in the party? Did they seem to be fairly happy?
Yes, Miss Andre was smiling, and Mr. Faulkner even laughed as they went to the elevator.
Did you see any of those men leave?
Yes, the first about 15 minutes later. It was the drunken one. Though he didn't seem quite so drunk. He could walk, but he staggered a little. I went to help him, seeing the condition he was in. When he saw me coming, he went straight for the door, got in his car, and boy did he step on it. But he couldn't have gone up the car. The cops must have got him.
And what makes you say that?
Well, this other car was following him.
What car? The defendant will please keep quiet.
If Miss Andre will allow me to ask you questions, she may just find that I'll satisfy her curiosity. I was just going to ask. What car, Mr. Hutchins?
It was a big black sedan parked about 2 cars away.
Did you see the other man leave?
Yes, about 10 minutes later.
Was there anything unusual about his behavior?
No, nothing unusual. Just went straight to the door and left.
Then what happened?
Well, I started my rounds to the building. As I was doing my rounds, about an hour later, I heard screaming coming from outside. Sandra came running out of the elevator. I followed her outside. And
No!
There was Mr. Faulkner all over the pavement.
What did she do?
She had fallen to her knees and she was crying. It was horrible. I'd never seen a body smashed like that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hutchins. I have no further questions.
You said they never saw Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his wedding, the exception of that night. Now, tell us, do you always see every visitor who enters the building at night?
Well, I guess not. I have my rounds to make at the building. If the guest had a key, they could enter, and I wouldn't notice them at all.
In other words, Miss Andre could have had a number of visitors, Mr. Faulkner included, whom you've never seen come in.
I guess it's quite possible.
That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. You may now step down.
Homer Van Fleet? Homer Van Fleet?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Your name?
Homer Herbert Van Fleet,
And your occupation?
private investigator.
Could you tell us what your last assignment was?
Shadowing of Mr. Bjorn Faulkner.
And by whom were you hired to do this?
Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
Oh. Were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the evening of January 16th?
I was.
Would you kindly tell us about it?
I will start with 6:13 p.m.
And just how did you know the time?
It's part of my duties, you see. I have to record and report in detail.
I see.
6:13 p.m. He leaves his home on Long Island. Wears formal dress. Drives his car himself, alone. Special notation, unusual speed all the way to New York.
And where did Mr. Faulkner go?
The Faulkner Building. The 757. All offices closed. You go inside. Then 9:35 p.m. Faulkner and Miss Andre exit together. Miss Andre is dressed formally. They drive away.
Where did they go?
Well, no one in this world is perfect.
And just what do you mean by that?
I lost track of them due to Mr. Faulkner's unusual speed and an accident.
What accident?
Another car collided with my left fender. The damage for which will be charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
What did you do after you lost track of them?
I went to the Faulkner building and waited. They didn't return until 10:30 p.m. Exactly. A gray car follows them. Faulkner gets out and helps out Miss Andre. While she rings the bell, he goes and opens the door for another man, a tall gentleman in formal dress. Then the two of them open up a third door for another man wearing a beige trench coat. Special notation, the aforementioned gentleman appears to show signs of inebriation.
Then what did you do?
I went to Gary's Grill across the street. I must explain myself. I allow myself time for nourishment every 4 hours while on the job. And you see, 4 hours had elapsed since I left Long Island. So I sat in the Faulkner building. So I sat at the window seat and watched the Faulkner building.
And what did you observe?
Nothing for 15 minutes. Then the man in the beige trench coat leaves, obviously in a hurry, gets to the gray car and drives away. South.
Did you see any other guests of Miss Andre's leave?
Yes, 10 minutes later. The other man left. Tall one. He got in the car standing at the curb. I have no idea how he got there, but there it is. He seems to have the keys because he gets in and drives away. South.
Then what did you do?
Well, I'm curious. Now Mr. Faulkner is alone in the penthouse of Miss Andre. I'm curious. Professionally, of course. A special observation post. Used it before.
And where is that?
At the Skytop. Nightclub.
And where within the nightclub is your observation post?
There's a gallery of open windows. If you look through them, you can see Faulkner's penthouse is clear from all your hand. Go out. Look. I yell.
What did you see?
It's Faulkner. It's Andre. He's hoisting a man up. Man in evening clothes. Faulkner. Unconscious. No resistance. She pushes him with all her strength. Over the parapet. Down. Into space.
What did you do?
I went back to the dining hall and yelled at what I'd seen. Crowd follows me. Faulkner building. There's a bloody mess all over the ground. Miss Andre's crying above it. Tears to move a first night audience.
Did you speak to her?
No, the police had arrived, so I reported to them what I'd seen, as I've told you here.
Thank you for your time, Inspector Bentley. Your witness?
Mr. Van Fleet, can you kindly tell us when you first started in the employ of Mrs. Faulkner?
October 13th, last.
And can you tell us the date of Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner's wedding?
October 12th, the day before.
Exactly. Just the day before. In other words, Mrs. Faulkner hired you to spy on her husband the day after their wedding?
So it would seem.
What were Mrs. Faulkner's first instructions to you when you were hired?
Shadow Mr. Faulkner's every movement and report in detail.
Any special attention to Miss Andre?
Not specified.
Had Mr. Faulkner been calling on Miss Andre after his wedding?
Yes, frequently.
During the daytime?
Seldom.
Did you report this to Mrs. Faulkner?
I did.
What was her reaction to these reports?
Mrs. Faulkner is a lady, and as such, she had no reactions.
Did she seem worried?
No. Mr. Faulkner is the most dedicated of husbands, and he loves his wife dearly.
Just what makes you say that?
Those were Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Now, Mr. Van Fleet, can you tell us exactly what time you left for the Skytop nightclub on the evening of January 16th?
11:32, exactly.
And how long a walk is it from the Faulkner building to the Skytop?
3 minutes.
And what time is it when you arrived at the balcony?
11:57.
So, it took you exactly 25 minutes to get to the balcony? What were you doing the rest of the time, Mr. Van Fleet?
Well, Skytop is a nightclub, and as such, it has a dance floor and other things.
Hey, sailor. Want to back up to throw some drinks?
Ladies, please, I'm on duty. But don't be a stranger.
Did you take advantage of the other things?
I had a couple of drinks to understand the drift of your curiosity, but that does not mean you can say I was intoxicated.
I said nothing of the kind. As yet. Now, you were on the balcony, and you saw Miss Andre push Mr. Faulkner off the roof, and it was dark and a little distance away, and you, well, shall we say you had just had a couple of drinks?
Drinks have nothing to do with it.
Now, were you quite certain that she was pushing him? Couldn't she have been struggling with him?
That's a funny way of struggling. If I were struggling with a man, I wouldn't be hoisting him up by his... I wouldn't be hoisting him up by me.
Mr. Vanderbilt, what were Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you before you came here to testify?
I received no instructions of any kind. May I remind you that Mrs. Faulkner has been taken to California by her father to rest her shattered nerves, so I could not receive instructions even if she wanted to.
Mr. Van Fleet, do you think that Mr. Faulkner's suicide is very flattering to Mrs. Faulkner?
Objection.
Sustained.
Mr. Van Fleet, can you tell us how much a witness to Mr. Faulkner's murder would be worth to Mrs. Faulkner?
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
I would like to remind Mr. Stevens that he can be sued for making insinuations such as these.
Rest assured, I am making no insinuations. I am simply asking a question in a general way.
Well, let me remind you in a general way that perjury is not one of a private investigator's duties.
No special notations to the rule?
None.
That is all.
Not quite. I want you to ask him 2 more questions, Stevens.
Certainly, what are they, Miss Andre? What kind of car do you drive, Mr. Van Fleet?
A brown Buick, 2-door sedan. Last year's model. It's old, but serviceable.
Did you notice anyone driving after the man in the gray coat when you left the building?
Can't say that I did. Traffic was quite heavy at the time.
That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet. You may now step down from the witness stand.
Inspector Sweeney. Inspector Sweeney?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Your name?
The name's Sweeney, Elmer Sweeney. You, my dear, call me anything you like.
And your occupation?
I'm the inspector of police.
In the course of your duties, were you called upon to investigate the death of Bjorn Faulkner?
Yes, I was one of the first officers to reach the scene.
Did you speak to Miss Andre?
Not at first. That private investigator, Mr. Van Fleet, came up to me and started yapping about how he swore he saw Karen Andre throw Mr. Faulkner off the Faulkner building.
And how did Miss Andre react to this?
She was absolutely stunned. She stood there, her eyes wide fit to burst. Then she did the weirdest thing. She burst out laughing. I swear she went crazy.
Did you arrest her then?
Yes, I had her held up for questioning, and we took her with us up the elevator to examine the penthouse. What a joint.
Did you find anything in the penthouse penthouse that could be considered unusual?
Ah, yes. In the bedroom.
What did you find in the bedroom?
Nightgowns, lacy nightgowns, just spewed everywhere. They were all over a crystal bathtub, and we turned on the water. It was perfumed.
I think you're misunderstanding my question, Inspector. I wasn't referring so much to the aesthetic values of the penthouse, but more to anything that could be contributed to the death of Bjorn Faulkner.
Well, there was one thing in the dining room.
And what did you find in the dining room?
A letter. It was lying on the table in plain sight. It was addressed to whoever finds it first.
I'd like to ask you, Inspector, if this is the letter that you found in the dining room?
I believe so.
Would you kindly stand and read it to our jury?
Gladly. If any future historian wants to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say I found only two enjoyable things on this world where every door was open to me. My whip over the world and Karen Andre. To those who can use it, this advice is worth what it has cost mankind. Bjorn Faulkner.
Submitted as evidence?
Accepted as Exhibit A.
Now, Mr. Sweeney, did you question Miss Andre about this letter?
I did. She said that Mr. Faulkner wrote it and put it on the table and told her not to touch it. After that is when they went to the rooftop garden. When she saw what he was going to do, she tried to stop him, but there's nothing she could do.
And did she say anything about the other men that were with them that night?
Yes, she said they were two friends of Mr. Faulkner's, but she said she'd never seen them before. She said that Mr. Faulkner had found them in a nightclub and decided to take them along for the ride. Said their names were Jerry White and Dick Saunders.
And in your investigation of Mr. Faulkner's friends and acquaintances, did you ever find any men with those names?
We found that no one's ever heard of them.
And Miss Andre was quite adamant as she was at the inquest that she did not know them.
Yes,
She was very emphatic about this?
yes, very.
Thank you, Inspector. No further questions.
Miss Andre had told you that she had struggled with Mr. Faulkner to prevent his suicide. Did you find any evidence of this in her clothing?
Oh yes, her dress was torn and one of her diamond shoulder straps was broken, so she had to hold it up with just one hand.
And what do you think of that?
Do you really want me to tell you?
My line of work requires that I do.
I wish the other strap had broken too.
I meant that it appear as if it had been torn in a struggle.
I guess you could say that.
Now, can you tell us why on earth you turned the shower on in the bathroom?
Well, there's a rumor that he installed wine instead of water in it pipes.
You mustn't believe the rumors you hear about Bjorn Faulkner. That's all, Inspector.
Thank you, Inspector Sweeney. You may now step down from the witness stand.
Magda Svensson.
Meg Svensson.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
What is your name?
You know it. You just called me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. State your name
Magda Svensson.
and your occupation.
I am housekeeper.
For how long have you been employed by Mr. Faulkner?
I've been in the family 38 years. I known Bjorn since he was a little child.
And how long have you been in America for?
5 years.
What kind of duties did Mr. Faulkner assign to you as his housekeeper?
I keep penthouse for him. I keep even after he go, after his marriage. But I was never employed by this one.
Now, Mrs. Svensson.
Miss Svensson.
I'm so sorry, Miss Svensson. What could you tell us about the nature of the relationship between Karen Andre and Bjorn Faulkner?
Decent woman like me shouldn't know such things. But sin is shameless in this world.
Could you tell us about it?
From the very first day, she's sleeping with Herr Faulkner. It does not do well when man forgets lying between his bed and his desk. and she put her claws right on both. Sometimes they discussed loans and dividends in bed. Other times, he locked the door to his office, and beneath the blinds pulled down, I could see her lace pants on the windowsill.
You object, Your Honor!
Oh, I think Miss Andre should have objected a few years ago.
Such line of testimony is outrageous!
These are vital facts pertaining to the condition of their relationship.
Silence. Perhaps I will ask the witness to word her testimony just a little more carefully.
Cinnamon made you call it, Judge.
Miss Svensson, could you think of any instances other than moral, where Miss Andre's conduct was detrimental to Mr. Faulkner?
You tried to count up all the money he wasted on that woman.
Could you give us an example of his extravagance?
I tell you, he had a platinum gown made for her. Yes, I said platinum. Fine, soft, mesh like silk. She wore it on her naked body, and I could see it in silver sheen. It would have been more decent if she was naked. He'd make a fire in the fireplace and heat the dress up as hot as she could stand. And when it burned her shameless skin, she laughed like the pagan she is, and he kissed the burns, wild like tiger.
You object, Your Honor! Such line of testimony is irrelevant and only tends to prejudice the jury against Miss Andre.
Let her talk, Stevens. Perhaps it may prejudice the jury in my favor.
Silence.
Mr. Stevens has my sympathy. His client is certainly not an easy one to handle.
Silence. The defendant will please keep quiet.
Miss Svensson, could you tell us about Mr. Faulkner's feelings about his marriage? Did he have anything in those days that could have eventually driven him to suicide?
No. He was happy, like good man that found right road.
And what about Miss Andre? How did she react to Mr. Faulkner's marriage?
She's silent, like
Miss
stone
Flint!
sta-
Mrs. Faulkner?
I understand you want to call me as a witness.
Well, I did, Mrs. Faulkner, but I was told you were in California.
I escaped.
You escaped.
Well, Father was concerned over my health. He didn't want me to testify, but I wanted to do my duty towards the memory of my husband.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Mrs. Faulkner. If you just take a seat, I'll be with you in just a moment. Thank you. You were telling us about Miss Andre's reaction to Mr. Faulkner's wedding.
I said, she's silent, like stone statue. But I hear her crying one night. Crying. Sobbing. And that was the first and only time in her life.
Did she seem to suffer very much?
Suffer. No, not her. One man more or less makes no difference. I seen her unfaithful to Herr Faulkner on the night of his wedding.
Unfaithful? With who?
I not no man. I see him first on that very night.
Could you tell us about it, Miss Svensson?
Oh, it was beautiful. Oh, my poor Bjorn, so handsome. And the bride, white and lovely as a lily. I cried like looking at my own children. But she not go to wedding.
Did Miss Andre stay home?
She stay home. I come back early. I come to servants' doors. And I go out into the garden. And I see Miss Andre. But she is not alone.
Who was with her?
He was the man. He hold her in his arms. I think he want to crush her bones. And he lean her so back, her back so far, I think she gonna fall in her reflection in the pool. And then he kiss her. I think he never get his lips off hers.
Then what happened?
They stand up. And she step back and say something. I not hear. She speaks very soft. Then he takes her hand and he brings it to his lips. And he kissed it for so long. I get tired and I go back to my room.
Now, had you ever seen this man before?
No, never.
Have you seen him since?
Yes. On the night of January 16th.
Really? Could you tell us about it, Miss Spencer?
Well, Miss Andre, very strange that day. She told me that I could go home, and I've been suspicious.
Why would that make you suspicious?
My day off is Thursday, and I not ask for second day. So I say I not need day off, and she says she not need me. So I go.
And around what time did you leave at?
About 4 o'clock. But I want to know secrets, so I come back.
And what time did you come back at?
About 10 at night. I go to the penthouse, and it's dark, no one there. About half hour later, she come back. Herr Faulkner with her, so I afraid to stay. But before I go, I see 2 other men with them. One was drunk, and I don't know who he is. And the other was tall and had sharp cheekbones. He was the man I see kissing Miss Andre on the night of the wedding.
Thank you, Miss Spencer. I have no further questions.
Just a moment, Miss Spencer. You still have to have a little talk with me.
Why, I say all I know.
You may know the answers to a few more questions. Now, you said you saw the stranger kiss Miss Andre?
Yes.
And you said it was dark that night you saw him for the first time.
Yes, it was dark.
And on January 16th, when you were so geniusly spying on your mistress, you saw her enter the building with Mr. Faulkner and then hurried to depart, not be caught. Is this correct?
You have good memory.
And you caught for just a swift glance the 2 gentlemen with them.
Yes.
Could you tell us what the drunken gentleman looked like?
How could I? No time to notice. Dark at door.
So, it was dark, and you were in a hurry, and yet you were able to identify a man you had seen but once before?
Listen here, mister. I am under oath, as you say, and I am a religious woman who respect oath. And I say it was the same man, and I say it again.
That is all. Thank you, Miss Spencer.
Thank you, Miss Spencer. You may now leave the witness stand.
Nancy Lee Faulkner. Nancy Lee Faulkner?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do. What is your name?
Nancy Lee Faulkner.
And what was your relationship to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
I understand this is going to be very difficult for you, Mrs. Faulkner, and I do appreciate your courage. But I am going to have to ask you a number of questions, and they may bring back some painful memories.
I'm ready, Miss Flint.
When did you first meet Bjorn Faulkner?
In the August of last year,
Where did you meet him?
at a ball given by my friend Sam Van Rensselaer in Newport.
Would you kindly tell us about it, Mrs. Faulkner?
Macy Sam introduced us.
Oh, Nancy. So good of you to come.
I wouldn't miss it for the world. It's quite the event.
It is indeed. Quite a few people here. Here's a tough one for you. Let's see if you can add this scout to your well-known collection. Bjorn?
Sam had always insisted on exaggerating my popularity.
Let me introduce you to somebody. Bjorn Faulkner.
We danced that night. We danced in the garden, and we stopped by the edge of the pool. We were alone in the darkness. The faint sound of blue diamond bolts filled in silence. I remember he gave a rose to me, and put his arm around my shoulders. why, but flesh. He noticed, and he apologized, graciously smiling at me. And then he took me back to the guests. I think we both felt a silent understanding that night, for we didn't dance with each other again.
When did you next see him?
3 days later. He dined at my home on Long Island. It's a real Swedish meal. I cooked it myself.
That was delicious.
Did you see each other often after that?
Yes, quite frequently. Until the day he proposed to me.
Would you please tell us about it, Mrs. Faulkner?
We went driving that day. Mr. Faulkner and I, alone. It was a beautiful day with bright, cold sunshine. I remember I felt so young, so happy that I grew reckless.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you wish to be dismissed for now and continue again tomorrow, we can...
No, I can go on. I was reckless enough to lose my way. We stopped on the edge of a strange country road, and I said, "We're lost. I've kidnapped you, and I won't release you."
The ransom you want is not in circulation.
Then he seized my hands and he told me.
What's the use of pretending, Nancy? I love you.
It was then that I learned about the desperate state of Mr. Faulkner's fortune.
But we cannot marry because I've nothing to offer you.
Nothing can stand in our way. I love you.
Now, did Mr. Faulkner seem at all hopeless about the future when your engagement was announced?
No, not at all. We used to dream of the future together. He said that my faith in him and my courage helped him so much. I made him realize his past mistakes, and he was ready to atone for them. We were entering a new life together, a life of unselfish devotion to the service and welfare of others.
And did you remain in New York after your wedding?
Yes, we made our home in my Long Island residence. Mr. Faulkner gave up his New York penthouse.
Now, Mrs. Faulkner, did Mr. Faulkner ever tell you about his past relationship with Karen Andre?
Not then, but he did, 2 weeks later. He said that Karen Andre. He said, "Dearest, there is a woman. There was a woman, and I feel I must tell you about her." I said I knew it, and that he needn't say a word if he'd rather not.
And what did he tell you?
He said that Karen Andre is the cause and symbol of my darkest years. He was going to dismiss her.
And how did you reply to that?
I said I understood him, but we didn't have to be cruel. Perhaps we could find another place for him in the company.
So you therefore dismissed Miss Andre entirely voluntarily?
Yes, but there are 2 kinds of women in this world, and my kind is never jealous of the other.
Now, Mrs. Faulkner, did Bjorn ever talk about his plans for the future?
We used to dream of the future together, even on the night before his death. We were sitting in the study by the fire, talking about the days ahead. We knew we would not be wealthy for long, if ever. We didn't care. We'd renounced all material concerns with all their consequences: pride, selfishness, ambition. the desire to rise above our fellow men. We're going to devote ourselves to our spiritual values. We're going to leave the city and live in some modest community. We're going to be just like everyone else.
And just to clarify, this was on January 15th, the day before his death?
Yes.
Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior on January the 16th?
No, not at all. He spent it in town, on business as usual. Then he came home late in the afternoon.
I have a business banquet to attend to.
So he didn't stay for dinner. He left at about 6 o'clock.
What banquet did Mr. Faulkner have to attend to?
I didn't ask and he didn't tell me. I made a point never to interfere in his business.
Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior as he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not at all. He kissed me on the cheek. And then he said,
I will try to be home early.
I remember watching him walk off from the desk, thinking of how happy we were, and what a beautiful dream our love had been. Like a delicate ideal. Like, I had no idea that our romance would indirectly bring about his death.
I object, Your Honor. Move that be stricken out.
The witness's last sentence may go out.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Faulkner. I have no further questions.
Will you be able to answer a few questions for us now, Mrs. Faulkner?
As many as you'd like.
You said that your love was like a perfect dream, didn't you?
Yes.
A sacred troth that regenerated a soul.
Yes.
A beautiful, uplifting relationship based on mutual trust.
Yes.
Then why did you hire a detective to spy on your husband?
I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect him.
Would you care to explain this?
Well, you see, some time ago, my husband was threatened by a gangster. Guts Reagan? I believe that's what they call him. Well, he paid no attention to it. Mr. Faulkner could not be intimidated. But I was worried. So the day after we were married, I hired Mr. Van Fleet to follow him. I did it in secrecy because I knew he'd object.
How could a sleuth, following at a distance, protect Mr. Faulkner?
Well, I heard the underworld had ways of finding out these things. I figured no one would attack a man who's constantly being watched.
So all Mr. Van Fleet had to do was watch Mr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone?
Yes.
Not Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre?
I find that supposition insulting.
I haven't noticed you sparing any insults, Mrs. Faulkner.
I'm sorry. That was not my intent.
You said that Mr. Faulkner told you never wanted to see Miss Andre again?
Yes, he did.
And yet, he called on her after your wedding. He called on her often and at night. Your detective told you this, didn't he?
Yes, I knew it.
How do you explain it?
Well, how am I supposed to know what kind of blackmail plot she could have been holding over his head?
How do you explain the fact that on January 16th, Mr. Faulkner lied to you about his business banquet left directly in Miss Andre's penthouse that night?
Mr. Stevens, if I could explain that, we might have an answer to my husband's mysterious death. All I know is that Mr. Faulkner went to her house for some reason which he could not explain, and that he was found dead that evening.
I have one last question for you, Mrs. Faulkner.
Yes?
I want you to state here, under oath, that Mr. Faulkner loved you.
Bjorn Faulkner was mine.
That is all.
Not quite. I want you to ask her one more question, Stevens.
What is it, Miss Andre?
Ask her whether she loved him.
I did, Ms. Andre.
Then how can you speak of him as you did? How can you lie? Lie about him when he can't stand to defend himself!
How can I be questioned by the murders of my husband?
That's all.
may now step down from the witness stand, Miss Faulkner.
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. This is...
One of us is lying. We both know which one.
Court will now adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That is all.
All rise.
Court, attention. All rise. Superior Court, number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilma Heath presiding.
You may now be seated. The State of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
We're ready, Your Honor.
The district attorney may now proceed.
If Your Honor, please, the prosecution has one final witness to introduce. Mr. John Graham Whitfield. John Graham Whitfield. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
For the record, would you state your name
I am John Graham Whitfield.
and your occupation?
I am the president of the Whitfield National Bank.
It is obvious, Mr. Whitfield, that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. Could you tell us then about the state of Mr. Faulkner's business enterprises at the time preceding his death?
I shall say it was desperate, but it was not hopeless for a man of my stature. You see, my bank made a $25 million loan to Mr. Faulkner in an attempt to save his enterprises. Now, needless to say, that money is now lost.
What prompted you to make this loan, Mr. Whitfield?
He was the husband of my only daughter. Her happiness has always been paramount to me. But my motives were not entirely personal. You see, realizing the countless tragedies to small investors that the crash would undoubtedly bring, I considered it my duty to do everything possible to prevent it.
Is it possible, Mr. Whitfield, that you would have granted such a substantial loan had you believed Mr. Faulkner's business hopelessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. I had full confidence my business acumen was up to the task, as long as Mr. Faulkner lived.
Mr. Whitfield, in your opinion, did Mr. Faulkner have any reason to commit suicide as far as his business enterprises were concerned?
Certainly not.
And what could you tell us about his satisfaction with his family life and his relationship with your daughter?
Miss Flint, I would like to start by saying that I have always viewed the home and the family as the most important institutions in our lives. And you will therefore believe me when I tell you how important my daughter's family happiness was to me. And she had found perfect happiness with Mr. Faulkner.
Mr. Whitfield, can I ask you what your personal opinion of your son-in-law was?
Well, it's only fair to say that we are as different as two human beings could be. You see, I consider my duty above all. Mr. Faulkner believes in nothing but his own pleasure.
Mr. Whitfield, from your knowledge of him, do you think it possible that your son-in-law committed suicide?
I consider it absolutely impossible.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
Yes.
And you never disagreed with him? Never lost your temper in a quarrel?
Mr. Stevens, I don't have a temper to lose.
If my memory serves me right, there was a bit of trouble at the time of you making that stupendous loan to Mr. Faulkner. Something to the effect that you denied making the loan?
That is entirely a misunderstanding, I assure you. It is true, however, that Mr. Faulkner made a somewhat unethical attempt to hasten the loan, which was entirely unnecessary, for I was quite willing to grant it gladly, for my daughter's sake.
You said that your personal fortune has been heavily damaged by the Faulkner crash?
Yes.
And that your financial situation is rather strained at present?
Yes.
Then how can you afford to place a $10,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Guts Reagan?
Objection, Your Honor. What has this got to do with
Your
the case?
Honor, I would like to have the privilege of answering this.
Very well.
You see, the gentleman commonly known as Guts Reagan is a notorious criminal. I considered it my duty, my civic duty in fact, to do everything in my power to aid in the arrest and conviction of that man. However, I do agree that it is entirely irrelevant to this case.
Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us why you left for California in such a hurry before the beginning of this trial?
Now, I do believe that is quite obvious. My daughter was crushed by the sudden tragedy. I hastened to take her away to save her health and perhaps her life.
You love your daughter profoundly?
Yes.
You've always made it that our every wish should be granted.
Yes.
When she or you desire anything, you don't stop at the price, do you?
Mr. Stevens, we don't have to.
Then would you refuse to buy her the man she wanted?
Objection. Sustained.
You wouldn't stop if it took your entire fortune to break the first unbreakable man you've ever met?
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, or are you going to tell us you had nothing to do with Miss Andrea's dismissal? That no ultimatum was delivered?
Mr. Stevens, you are quite mistaken in your insinuations. See, my daughter was no more jealous of Miss Andre than she would be of Bjorn Faulkner's soiled underwear. See, all men have some at one time or another.
I'd be careful with statements such as these, Mr. Whitfield. Remember that your daughter paid for where Kara and Andre got free. That is just what I wanted to prove. That is all. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield.
Your Honor, we'd like to move that the defense counsel's outrageous remark which led to this incident be stricken from the record.
The remark may go out. Mr. Whitfield, you may now leave the witness stand.
The people rest.
Move that the case be dismissed for lack of evidence.
Denied.
Exception.
Noted.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot pass judgment on Karen Andre without first passing it on Bjorn Faulkner. He had placed himself beyond all present standards. Now whether it is below or above them is a question for each of us to decide personally. But I'll ask you to remember that he was the man who said they needed no justifications for his actions. The man who said that he was the justification. The man who said the laws are made for the fun of breaking them. And if you remember this, then you will understand that this life he was thrown into in his last few months, that it was impossible to him as that of a tiger in a vegetarian cafeteria. And to escape it, he'd be driven to the most desperate of means, including suicide. Our first witness will be Jane Chandler.
Jane Chandler? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Jane Chandler.
And what is your occupation?
I am the handwriting expert of the New York Police Department.
Do you recognize this letter?
Why, yes! This is a letter found in Mr. Faulkner's penthouse on the night of his death. I've been called upon to examine it.
And what were you asked to determine?
I was asked to determine whether it was written by Mr. Faulkner.
And what is your verdict?
This letter was in fact written by Mr. Faulkner.
That is all.
Miss Chandler, during the inquest, it was brought to your attention that during her time as his secretary, Karen Andre developed the habit of signing Faulkner's name to unimportant documents. Have you compared those signatures with the real ones?
I have.
And your opinion?
Well, I can compliment Miss Andre on her art. The difference is very slight.
And yet, given Miss Andre's, well, intimate knowledge of Mr. Faulkner, is it not possible that she could have forged those signatures so perfectly as to avoid detection?
Well, I guess it's possible, but it's not probable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Chandler. You may now step down from the witness stand.
Sigurd Youngquist.
Sigurd Youngquist? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Sigurd Youngquist.
What is your occupation?
My last job was secretary to Herr Bjorn Faulkner.
How long have you held that position?
Since beginning of November, since Miss Andre left.
And what was your job before that?
Bookkeeper for Herr Faulkner.
How long did you hold that position?
Eight years.
Did Mr. Faulkner give you Miss Andre's position when she was dismissed?
Yes.
And did Miss Andre instruct you in your new duties?
Yes, she did.
And what was her behavior like at the time? Did she seem angry, sorry, or resentful?
No, she was very calm, like always, and explained everything clearly.
Did you notice any trouble between Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre?
Herr lawyer, there could be no more trouble between Herr Faulkner and Miss Andre as between you and your face in the mirror.
Mr. Youngquist, did you witness any business conferences between Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Whitfield?
I've never been present at conferences, but Herr Whitfield, he come by our office many times. Herr Whitfield, you're not like Herr Faulkner.
What makes you think that?
Well, I heard what he said one day. Herr Faulkner is desperate for money, and Herr Whitfield asked him, sarcastic like,
And what would you do if your business did crash?
Oh, commit suicide.
If you do, be sure you make a good job of that.
Now, Mr. Young. If Your Honor, please. I would like to report this incident, which I consider as a hoax, and whose purpose I would like to determine. A man has asked to speak to me immediately on the telephone. When informed that would be impossible, he brought the following message just brought to me. Don't put Karen Andrew on the stand until I get there. No signature.
I want to go on the stand right away.
Can I ask why, Miss Andre?
Question me now, Stevens.
I'm afraid that's impossible, Miss Andre. You have to finish Mr. Youngquist's examination first.
Then hurry.
Silence! I shall ask the defendant to refrain from further interruptions.
Mr. Youngquist, where were you on the night of January 16th?
I was in our office, in the Faulkner building. I've been working late for many nights.
What did you do when you first heard of Mr. Faulkner's suicide?
Well, I want to call Herr Whitfield, so I telephoned his home in Long Island, but Butler said not home. So I called his office in town, no answer. I called many places looking for Herr Whitfield, but I never found him. Finally, I called his home again, and I have to tell Miss Faulkner that Herr Faulkner committed suicide.
And when you did, what were Mrs. Faulkner's first words?
She said, "For God's sake, don't give it to the newspapers."
That is all.
Just a moment, Miss Andre. Why are you in such a hurry exactly? Are you waiting for somebody? You're expecting them? Now, Mr. Youngquist, you worked for Mr. Faulkner for over 8 years, is that correct?
Yes?
Did you know at the time how big of a criminal and a swindler he was?
No, I did not.
Do you know now how crooked and illegal his operations were?
I do not know that.
And what about all of those brilliant financial operations?
I knew that Herr Faulkner did what other men are not allowed to do. But I never wonder, I never doubt. I know it's not wrong.
And how did you know that?
Because he was Herr Bjorn Faulkner.
Oh, I see, and he could do no wrong.
Frau Lawyer, when tiny people like you and me, when tiny people like us, when we meet a man like Bjorn Faulkner, we take our hats off and bow, and sometimes we take orders, but we never ask questions.
Splendid, Mr. Youngquist. Your devotion to your master is truly admirable. Tell me, are you this devoted to Miss Andre as well?
Miss Andre was dear to Herr Faulkner.
Then such a little matter as a few lies for her sake would just mean nothing to you, would they?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
I'm not lying, Herr Boyer. Herr Faulkner is dead. You cannot tell me to lie, but if I had choice, I would lie for Herr Faulkner or tell the truth for you.
For which statement I am far more grateful than you can possibly imagine, Mr. Youngquist. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Youngquist. You may now leave the witness stand.
Karen Andre.
Aaron Andre. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
That's useless, I'm an atheist.
The witness has to affirm, regardless.
I affirm.
What is your name?
Karen Andre,
And what is your occupation?
secretary to Bjorn Faulkner,
How long have you held that position?
10 years.
Tell us about your first meeting with Bjorn Faulkner.
I answered his advertisement for a stenographer in the newspaper. I met him in his office on a side street of Stockholm. It was my first job. It was his first office.
How did Faulkner greet you?
He stood and looked at me. His gaze was insulting even when silent. I didn't know whether to kneel or slap his face. I didn't do either. I told him what I'd come for. I'm here for the job.
Did he hire you then?
You're too young. All right. Hurry up, I don't have all day.
You worked all day?
All day. He dictated as fast, almost faster than he could talk. He never smiled once, and he never took his eyes off me.
Okay, now, when did, when did he first...
When did he first take me? That first day we met.
How did that happen?
He seemed to take a delight in giving me orders. He acted as if he were cracking a whip over an animal he wanted to break, and I was afraid.
Because you didn't like that?
Because I liked it. So when I finished my 8 hours, I told him I was quitting. He looked at me and didn't answer. Then he asked me suddenly if I'd ever slept with a man, and I said no, I hadn't. Then he said he'd give me $1,000 if I went into the back office and took my skirt off. I told him I wouldn't. And he said if I didn't, he'd take me. And I said, try it. He did. After a while, I picked up my clothes, but I didn't leave, I stayed. I kept the job.
And you worked and lived and rose to success together ever since?
For 10 years. When we made our first $1 million, he took me to Vienna. We ate at a restaurant where the orchestra played Sing Gypsy. When we made $10 million, he took me to Delhi. We stood on the shores of the Ganges, on the steps of an old temple where men had been sacrificed to gods. When we made $25 million, we hired a pilot to fly a plane over New York City, and the wind waved Bjorn's hair as a banner over the world at his feet.
Can you tell us the extent of Faulkner's personal fortune at the height of his success?
No, and he couldn't tell you himself. He didn't have any. He took what he wanted. When he owed money to one of his companies, it was crossed off the books and indebted to the concerns of several other affairs. It was very simple. We prepared the balance sheets ourselves.
Why did a man of Faulkner's genius resort to such methods?
He wanted to build a gigantic net, a net over the whole world held in his own hand. He had to establish his credit. So we drew dividends out of our capital, dividends much higher than we actually earned.
When did Faulkner's business difficulties begin?
Over a year ago.
What brought Faulkner to America this time?
A short-term loan of $10 million was due, and we could not meet it. We had to have an extension. Whitfield refused it, until his daughter came into the question.
How did that happen?
She met him at a party. She made it obvious that she was greatly interested in him. Then he approached me one day and said, Karen, we have only one piece of collateral left, and I'll have to borrow it for a while. And I said, certainly, what is it? He said it was himself. Then I asked, Nancy Whitfield? And he nodded. I didn't answer at first. It wasn't very easy to say, but then I said, all right, Bjorn. He asked if it would change things between us, and I said no.
Had Faulkner proposed to Miss Whitfield?
No. She had proposed to him.
How did that happen?
She took him for a drive on a lone country road. She said they were lost, that she had kidnapped him and would not release him. He, of course, said that the ransom she wanted was not in circulation. Then she turned to him point blank and said, what's the use of pretending? I love you and you know it. You don't want me and I know that. But I get what I want and I have the price. He said, what price is that? She said, the extension of a certain $10 million loan that you'll need to save your business. If you're to stay out of jail as a swindler, it'll only be in the custody of Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
That is a lie. That is a shameless lie. Silence. Anybody disturbing these proceedings will be asked to leave the courtroom.
What was Faulkner's answer to this, Miss Andre?
He said that it would take her awful lot of money. She said that money has never meant anything to me. Then he said, you are to remember that this is a business deal, that you are not buying any feeling, you are not to expect any. She said, "That's all right. I'll have you and you'll have your money." Such was the bargain.
Was Mr. Whitfield eager to accept this bargain?
Bjorn said he thought Mr. Whitfield would have a stroke when he learned of his daughter's intentions. But she always got what she wanted, and she insisted. So, Bjorn was extended the loan and given unlimited credit.
In other words, Faulkner sold himself as his last security?
Yes, and like the others, it meant nothing to him.
Did he resent that marriage?
No, we always faced our business as a war. We looked at this as our hardest campaign.
Why did Faulkner dismiss you 2 weeks after his wedding?
He was forced to do it. Mr. Whitfield refused the loan he had promised.
And what reason did he offer for this refusal?
The reason that Bjorn was keeping a mistress. It was Miss Whitfield's ultimatum. I had to be let go.
Did Mr. Whitfield grant the loan after you were dismissed?
No, Mr. Whitfield attached what he called a slight condition to it.
And what was the condition?
He wanted the controlling interest over Bjorn's enterprises.
And did Mr. Faulkner accept this condition?
Bjorn said he'd rather gather all of his stock certificates into a pile and strike a match.
And did Whitfield grant the loan?
No, Bjorn took it.
How did he do that?
By forging his signature on $25 million worth of securities.
How do you know that?
I helped him do it.
Did this help Faulkner?
Only temporarily. Certain dividend payments were coming due and we could not meet them. We had stretched our credit to the utmost. There was simply no more to be had.
How did Faulkner take the situation?
He knew it was the end.
What were his plans?
You don't find men like Bjorn Faulkner crying before a bankruptcy commission. And you don't find them locked in jail.
And the alternative?
Bjorn was not afraid of the world. He had defied its every law. He was going to leave it when and how he pleased.
I told you to wait for me.
That's great, Larry, you promised you'd stay away. Your Honor,
Karen,
please
you don't
be quiet.
understand. Things have changed.
Your Honor, I demand that this man not be allowed to testify.
Oh, and why not, Miss Andre?
Don't say a
Your
word.
Honor!
Karen, stop her, for God's sake.
Your Honor, this man loves me. He'll do anything to save me. He'll lie. Don't believe a word he says.
Karen, your sacrifice is useless. Faulkner's dead.
He's dead?
Yes.
Bjorn's dead?
I'm sorry, did you not know this, Miss Andre?
Court attention, all rise. Superior Court, number 11 of the state of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilma Heath presiding.
You may now be seated. The State of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
If it please your honor, I'd like to report that I have issued a warrant for the arrest of Gus Reagan, who's obviously an accomplice in this murder case.
Keep your shirt on. Who's disappeared, Miss Flint? What do you think I showed up here for? Just to give you guys a thrill? You don't need to issue any warrants. I'm not going anywhere. She's guilty, then I'm guilty.
Well, the district attorney may now proceed.
Karen Andre.
Karen Andre?
Miss Andre, when you took the stand for the first time, do you know the whole truth about this case?
No.
Do you wish to retract any of your testimony?
No.
When you took the stand yesterday, did you intend to shield anyone?
Yes.
Whom?
Bjorn Faulkner.
Do you still find it necessary to shield him now?
No, it's not necessary anymore.
Do you still claim that Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
No, he was murdered, but not by me. Please believe me, not for my sake, I don't care what you do to me now, but because you cannot let this murder remain unpunished. I lied at the inquest, lied to my own attorney. I was going to lie here, but everything I've said so far is the truth. I'll tell you the rest.
You were telling us about Faulkner's ways out of his difficulties, Miss Andre.
He was to leave the world, but he was not to kill himself. I did throw a man's body off the penthouse, but that man was dead before I threw it. He was not Bjorn Faulkner.
Will you kindly explain this to us, Miss Andre?
Bjorn wanted to be officially dead. No searches or investigations were to bother him. That suicide was staged. We had had the plan in mind for a long time. We had saved $10 million worth the Whitfield forgery for this. But we needed someone who could help us, someone who could not be connected to Bjorn in any way. There was only one such person, Reagan.
What made you believe that Reagan would be willing to help you in so dangerous an undertaking?
Reagan loved me.
And he agreed to help in spite of that?
He agreed because of that.
Tell us the plan, Miss Andre.
Reagan was to get a corpse, but he was not to kill anyone for the purpose. That day, January 16th, Lefty O'Toole, a gunman, was killed by rival gangsters. His murderers have since confessed and been arrested, so you can be sure that Reagan had nothing to do with the murder. But you will remember that O'Toole's body went missing from his mother's house. That was Reagan's work. O'Toole's height, weight, and measurements were the same as Bjorn's. He was the man I threw off the penthouse.
Is that the extent of Reagan's help?
No, he was to get an airplane and fly Bjorn to South America. Bjorn had never learned how to operate a plane. Reagan used to be a transport pilot. That day, Bjorn transferred the $10 million to 3 banks in Buenos Aires, under the name of Ragnar Hedin. A month later, I was to meet him at the Hotel Continental, but until then, the 3 of us were not to communicate. Till then, we were not to reveal the secret.
Tell us what happened on the night of January 16th.
Bjorn came to my house. I'll never forget his smile as he stepped off the elevator. He loved danger. We had dinner together. At 9:30, we went to Reagan's house. He had had O'Toole's body dressed in traveling clothes. We went back to my place. Bjorn wanted to be seen entering the building, so I did not use my key. I rang the doorbell. We were dressed formally so as to make it look like a gay party. They had O'Toole's body propped up between them as if he were a drunken friend. The night watchman opened the door. Then we went up in the elevator.
And then what happened?
Bjorn exchanged clothes with the body. He wrote the letter. Then they took O'Toole and leaned him against the parapet out in the garden. And then we said goodbye. Reagan was to go. No, I believe it was Bjorn. Bjorn was to go first. He stood in the elevator and I watched as the needle of the indicator moved down, 50 floors down. Then he was gone.
And then?
Reagan left a few minutes later. They were to meet 10 miles out of the city where Reagan had left his plane. I stayed alone for an hour. The penthouse was so silent. I didn't want to stay out in the garden with the body, the dead man who was supposed to be Bjorn. I lay in the bed in my bedroom. I took Bjorn's robe and buried my face in it. I could almost feel the warmth of his body. There was a clock and it ticked in the darkness. I waited. When an hour had passed, I knew the plane had taken off, so I got up, tore my dress to make it look like a struggle. Then I went out to the garden, to the parapet. I looked down, there were so many lights, the world seemed so small, so far away. I threw the body over. I watched it fall. I thought all of Bjorn's troubles went with it. I didn't know that his life went too.
That is all, Miss Andre.
I must confess, Miss Andre, there's really not much left for me to do. In many ways, you've done all of my work yourself. Now, could you tell us, Did Bjorn Faulkner not have a clear conception of the difference between right and wrong?
Bjorn Faulkner never thought of things as right or wrong. To him it was only you can or you can't. He always could.
And what about yourself? Did you not object to helping him with all of those crimes?
To me it was only he wants or he doesn't.
Miss Andre, before you came here today, your lawyer told you that anything you say could be used against you. Is that not correct?
I'm here to tell the truth.
You loved Bjorn Faulkner?
Yes.
Such as he was?
Because he was such as he was.
Exactly, Miss Andre. Now what would you do if a woman were to take away from you the man that you worship so insanely? If she were to appeal to his soul and not to his, well, animal desires, as you seem to have done so successfully over the years. If she turned your scoundrel into her own ideal of an upright man, would you still love him?
You object, Your Honor.
Sustained.
I would like to answer this question. I want the district attorney to know that she is insulting the memory of Bjorn Faulkner.
Oh, I'm insulting him. And yet you thought nothing of insulting him while he lived with your affair with a notorious gangster.
You know nothing!
Don't, Larry! You're wrong, Miss Flint. Reagan loved me. I didn't love him.
And he didn't demand the usual price for his help?
He demanded nothing.
Miss Andre, you had all of the information that could have potentially sent Bjorn Faulkner to prison, did you not?
I would never do that.
But you could have if you wanted to.
Suppose.
Then isn't that your explanation for his continued association with you after his marriage? He wanted to reform. He wanted to avoid a crash, but you held it over his head. Wasn't it fear and not love that kept him in your arms?
Bjorn Faulkner didn't know the meaning of the word fear.
Miss Andre, who knew about the transfer of the $10 million to Buenos Aires?
Only Bjorn, myself, and Reagan.
And Reagan. Now Faulkner could have had perfectly legitimate business reasons for that transfer, couldn't he?
I don't know of any.
You mean you won't tell of any? Now, Miss Andre, Bjorn Faulkner kept you in extravagant luxury for over 10 years. You enjoyed penthouse apartments and platinum gowns and other little things like that. And you hated to change your mode of living. You hated to see him poor, didn't you?
It was never to see him poor.
No, because you and your gangster lover were going to murder him and keep the $10 million that nobody knew about.
You object, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Miss Andre, you've heard it testified today that Bjorn Faulkner had for the first time in his life achieved happiness, and that he had no more reason to escape from that happiness. And you hated him for that, didn't you?
You don't understand Bjorn Faulkner.
Maybe I don't. But let's see if I understand you. You were raped by a man the very first day that you met him. You proceeded to live with him for over 10 years in a brazenly illicit relationship. You defrauded thousands of investors the world over. You cultivated a friendship with notorious gangsters. And you told us all this proudly, flaunting your defiance of all decency. And you don't expect us to believe you to be capable of murder?
You're wrong, Miss Flint. I am capable of murder. For Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
That's all.
Thank you, Miss Andre. You may now leave the witness stand.
Lawrence Reagan.
Lawrence Reagan? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Lawrence Reagan.
And what is your occupation?
Unemployed.
How long have you known Miss Andre?
5 months.
Where did you first meet?
In Faulkner's office. I went there to do some business with him. But I gave up the business when I met his secretary.
How did you happen to become friendly with Miss Andre?
Well, the first meeting wasn't exactly friendly. She wouldn't let me in to see Faulkner. She said I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound and I had no business with her boss. I said I'd think it over and I went. I thought it over, only I didn't think of the business, I thought of her. The next day I sent her a pound of orchids. You ever see how much that makes? That's how it started.
Did you know of her relations with Mr. Faulkner?
I knew of it before I ever saw her. What of it? I knew his illness, but I I couldn't help it.
And you never expected her to share your feelings?
No.
You never made any attempt to force them upon her?
Do you have to know that?
I'm afraid we do.
I kissed her once. By force. It was the night of Faulkner's wedding. She was alone and so unhappy, and I was so crazy about her. I didn't want her to know, but she knew. We never mentioned it since.
When did you first hear of Faulkner's planned escape?
2 weeks before we were to pull it off.
Was Lefty O'Toole one of your men?
No.
Were you connected with his murderers in any way?
No.
You actually had no definite knowledge of his planned murder?
I just had a way of guessing.
What happened on the night of January 16th?
It all happened as Miss Andre has told you, but she only knows half of the story. I know the rest.
Tell us what happened after you left the penthouse that night.
I left 10 minutes after Faulkner. He had taken my car and I had one of my men drop off another at the door. I stepped on it, full speed.
Where did you go?
Meadow Lane, 10 miles out in Kings County. Faulkner was to get there first and wait for me.
What time did you get there?
Just after midnight. It was a bright moon. I saw the tracks where Faulkner's car had passed. And that turned onto the lane where I'd left my plane earlier in the evening. But it was gone.
What did you do?
I searched that lane for 2.5 hours. I found Faulkner's car where we had agreed to hide it. The key was in the switch, the lights were off, and it was empty. And then I saw the tracks, where the plane had taken off, but Faulkner couldn't have flown it himself.
Did you search for any clues to this mystery?
I searched like a bloodhound.
Did you find anything?
I did. One thing. A car.
What kind of car was it, Mr. Reagan?
It was hidden deep in the bushes on the other side of the lane. It was a big black sedan.
What did you do after you found the car?
I wanted to know whose car it was, so I smashed in a window and settled down in the back seat to wait.
How long did you have to wait?
The rest of the night.
And then?
And then the owner came back. I said, "Oh, it's you. Fancy such a meeting." I don't think you like that too much. He said,
"Who are you? What are you doing here?"
I said, "The name's Guts Reagan. Perhaps you've heard of me. I was in a spot of trouble, and, well, finding your car here was quite a convenience."
Well, that's too bad, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I'm in a hurry.
Oh, really? What's the hurry?
None of your business.
Oh, no, it's not for me. You see, a certain columnist happens to be a friend of mine. And I'm sure you'd like to know what a man of your prominence is doing wandering the wilderness in milkman's time. But I'm sure you'd like the full story.
What did the man say?
He said nothing. He looked at me, I looked at him, I shrugged, and then he pulled out his checkbook and asked,
"Will $10,000 be a suitable token of appreciation for your silence?"
"It'll do. The name's Lawrence Reagan." He wrote out the check. Here it is.
We offer this check-in as evidence.
This is ridiculous. Who is the man?
Who is the man, Mr. Reagan?
I have our clerk read that check to you.
Kindly read the check.
Pay to the order of Lawrence Reagan, $10,000 signed, John Graham Field.
Silence! If there are any more interruptions of this type, I will order the courtroom cleared.
We submit this check-in as evidence.
Objection! Objection overruled. Accepted as evidence.
What did you do after you received this check, Mr. Reagan?
I drew my gun, and I stuck it in his ribs. And I said, "Where did you take Faulkner?"
What did the man answer?
Nothing. He opened his mouth like a fish choking. He didn't make a sound.
Your Honor, is this man allowed to make such statements in public, in my presence?
The witness is allowed to testify, Mr. Whitfield. If it is deemed perjury, he will suffer the consequences. Proceed, Mr. Stevens.
What happened after that, Mr. Reagan?
At first he muttered,
Don't know what you're talking about.
so I said, cut it out. I have no time to waste. I'm in on it, and so are you. Where did you take Faulkner?
If you kill me now, you will never know.
Did you get any information out of him?
Not a word. But I didn't want to kill him. Not yet. He said,
If you expose me, you'll expose the fake suicide and Faulkner will be caught.
is he alive?
Go and ask him.
I talked. I threatened, but I couldn't get a word out of him. So I let him go. Figured I'd go get him later.
Then, did you try to find Faulkner?
I rushed home. I grabbed a sandwich and an airplane and I flew to Buenos Aires. I searched, I advertised in the paper, but no one had called in for Ragnar Heaton's millions.
Did you try to communicate any of this with Miss Andre?
No, we had agreed to stay away from each other for a month, and, well, besides, she had been arrested for Faulkner's murder. I laughed when I read that, but I couldn't say anything. Not to betray Faulkner if he were still alive, so I waited.
What were you waiting for?
February 16th at the Hotel Continental. I set my teeth and I waited every hour of that day. He didn't come.
And then?
And then I knew he was dead. So I flew back to New York and I started a search party for my plane. We found it yesterday.
Where did you find it?
A deserted valley in New Jersey. It had been landed and fire set to it. I recognized it by the engine number.
Was the plane empty?
No. There was a man inside.
Could you identify him?
No one could. It was nothing but a burnt skeleton. The height was the same. It was Faulkner. He hadn't died without a fight. He had been shot twice. Once in the heart and once straight through the hand. He must have been disarmed, shot through the hand, and then killed defenseless, straight through the heart.
That's all, Mr. Reagan.
Just what is your business, Mr. Reagan?
Oh, you'd like me to answer that, wouldn't you?
We object, Your Honor. The witness has the right not to answer that question.
Objection sustained.
Mr. Reagan, what do you do when potential clients refuse to pay your protection?
I'm legally allowed to not understand what you're talking about.
Very well. You don't have to understand. Can I question you as to whether you read the newspapers?
You may.
Well,
Well, question me.
will you kindly state whether you read newspapers?
Occasionally.
Then did you happen to read that when a Mr. James Sutton Vance Jr. refused to pay protection to, well, a certain gangster, his magnificent home in Westchester was destroyed in an explosion just seconds after the guests had left, barely missing a wholesale slaughter? Now what was that, Mr. Reagan? A coincidence?
A remarkable coincidence, Miss Flint. Just seconds after all the guests had left.
Did you also happen to read that when a Mr.
We object, Your Honor. Such questions are irrelevant to the case.
Sustained.
So you had no ill will towards Faulkner for the failure of your business with him?
No.
Mr. Reagan, what would you do if someone were to take this woman, whom you claim to love so profoundly, and rape her?
I'd cut his throat with a dull saw.
Oh, you would? And yet you expect us to believe that you, Gus Reagan, criminal, outlaw, and scum of the underworld, would just step aside in a grand gesture and throw the woman that you loved into the arms of another man?
Your Honor!
Shut up! I loved her.
Oh, you did? Then why did you allow Faulkner to continue to visit her?
I had nothing to say about that.
It wasn't because you two were holding a blackmail plot over his head?
Do you have any evidence of that?
Her association with you is the best evidence that there is.
Objection! Sustained.
How did you kill Faulkner in the penthouse that night?
Objection! Sustained.
Where is your accomplice, the man who played the drum?
I can give you his exact address. Evergreen Cemetery, Whitfield Family Memorial, which is the swankiest place poor Lefty's ever been.
I'm sorry. You expect us to believe that the random gangster Lefty O'Toole is in Mr. Faulkner's grave, and that Bjorn Faulkner is in a burnt-out plane in New Jersey?
Yes.
Then what's to say that it's not the other way around? Supposing that you did steal O'Toole's body, what's to say that you didn't stage the whole fantastic thing yourself, planting his body in New Jersey, and then showing up here with this wild story in a desperate attempt to save your mistress? You've heard her tell us that you'd do anything for her, that you would lie for her.
We object, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Where's your real proof, Mr. Reagan?
Miss Flint, you're a district attorney. And, well, you already know what I am. We both have a lot of dirty work to do. Such happens to be life. Or at least most of it. But do you truly think that we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, that we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. But she loved Faulkner. That is her only proof.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan. You may now leave the witness stand.
John Graham Whitfield.
John Graham Whitfield? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
That's not necessary. He's already been sworn in.
Mr. Whitfield, why do you object if I asked for an order to exhume the body at Evergreen Cemetery?
I would have no objections, but that body has been cremated.
I see. Mr. Whitfield, where were you on the night of January 16th?
I believe I was in New York on business that night.
Do you have any witnesses who can prove it?
You must understand, I am not accustomed to providing myself with alibis. And as such, I've had no need to keep track of my activities, and witnesses would be very difficult to come by.
How many cars do you own, Mr. Whitfield?
4.
What are they?
Yes, one of them is a black sedan, as you appear to be so anxious to know. But I will remind you, it is not the only black sedan in New York.
You just flew in from California by plane?
Yes.
You flew it yourself?
Yes.
You're a licensed pilot, then?
Yes, I am.
Now, this story of Mr. Reagan's is nothing but a big lie to you, isn't it?
Well, that's what it is.
Then who wrote the $10,000 check?
I did.
Would you care to explain this?
The gentleman known as Gus Reagan threatened to kidnap my daughter. I preferred to pay him off rather than take any chances with her help.
The check is dated January 17th. On that same day, you announced your reward for the arrest of Gus Reagan, correct?
Yes. Besides my feeling of civic duty, she was my daughter. I wanted prompt action.
Your daughter and your fortune are your two most cherished possessions, aren't they?
Yes.
Then what would you do to the man who took your money and deserted your daughter for another woman?
Objection! Sustained.
You hated Faulkner. You wanted to break him. You suspected his plot of staging suicide, didn't you? Did the Inquisitor say prove it?
I suspected nothing.
And on January 16th, didn't you spend the day watching Faulkner?
Certainly not.
Didn't you trail him in your black sedan? Didn't you follow him the moment he left his penthouse that night?
Fantastic. Mr. Stevens, how could I have recognized Mr. Faulkner leaving the building? Supposing it were Mr. Faulkner. Van Vliet, our detective himself, did not recognize him.
Van Fleet wasn't watching for a trick. He had no suspicion of the plot. You had.
How did I have a suspicion of the plot, Mr. Stevens?
You didn't have any particular information about Faulkner's activities at the time.
No.
You heard nothing unusual that day.
Not a thing.
For instance, that Faulkner transferred $10 million to Buenos Aires?
I hadn't heard of it.
No! I did it! I killed Faulkner! I helped that man to kill him! The whole truth. I didn't know, but I see it now! He killed Faulkner because he lied! He knew about the $10 million because I told him!
That's all, Mr. Whitfield.
No questions.
You may now leave the witness stand.
Kindly take the stand, Mr. Youngquist. Now, you said that you told Whitfield about the transfer?
I did. He asked me many times about the $10 million, where it was spent. I didn't know it was a secret. That day, I told him about Buenos Aires. That day, at noon, January 16th.
What kind of frame-up is this?
You told Whitfield at noon?
I did. God have pity on me. I didn't know it was a secret. I would give my life for Bjorn Faulkner. I helped to kill him.
That's all, Mr. Youngquist.
Mr. Youngquist. Mr. Youngquist. Were you alone with Mr. Whitfield when you had this conversation?
Yes?
So what you're really telling us is that it's your word against John Graham Whitfield's?
Yes.
Well, then no further questions.
You are now to leave the stand, Mr. Youngquist. Thank you.
The defense rests.
Are there any other witnesses?
No further witnesses.
The defense may now conclude the case.
Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are here to decide the fate of a woman. But much more than one woman is here on trial. Before you pronounce your verdict on Karen Andre, think of your verdict on Bjorn Faulkner. Do you believe that he was the kind of man who would bow, renounce, and repent? If you do, she's guilty. But if you believe that in this sad, half-hearted world of ours, that a man can still be born with life singing in his veins, a scoundrel? Yeah. A criminal? You could say so. A swindler? One of the worst. You can call him anything, but he's still a conqueror. And if you value a strength that is its own motor, an audacity that is its own law, a spirit that is its own vindication, if you are able to admire a man who, no matter what mistakes he may have made in form, had never betrayed his essence, his self-esteem. If, deep in your heart, you have felt a longing for greatness and for a sense of life beyond the lives around you, if you've felt a hunger that great timidity can never satisfy, then you will understand Bjorn Faulkner. And if you do, then you will understand the woman that was his priestess. If I may ask you a question, who's on trial in this case? Karen Andre? No. It is you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who are here on trial. And it is your souls that will be brought to light after this decision has been rendered.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. The district attorney may now conclude the case.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for once, I agree with the defense counsel. Two types of humanity are opposed in this case, and your verdict will have to depend on which side you choose to believe. Now, you were asked by the defense counsel to take the side of a swindler a gangster, and a harlot, against that of a man who is the model of social responsibility, and a woman who is everything that the ideal of womanhood has been for centuries. On one side, you see a life of service and duty towards others. On the other, a steamroller of sensual indulgence and egoistic ambition. Now, I agree with the defense counsel that your verdict today will be passed within your own souls. If you believe that man is put on this earth for a purpose higher than his own ambition, if you believe that love is more than sexual indulgence, but extends beyond your bedroom to your family, your friends, and your fellow man, if you believe that selfless service to others is still the highest ideal that a man can aspire to, then you will believe that simple virtue can trump arrogance, and that even a man like Bjorn Faulkner could be brought to bow before it. Now let your verdict show that none may raise his head higher in defiance of our common standards. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, your verdict will now be tabulated. I shall ask you to consider your verdict carefully. You are to determine whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty in the murder of Bjorn Faulkner.
Examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner. What I found was a body mangled to an extreme degree.
Well, he was a bit intoxicated, meaning no disrespect. He wasn't very steady on his feet. Mr. Faulkner and the other man had to help him. They almost dragged him into the elevator.
She was hoisting a man up. Faulkner. She was unconscious. No resistance. She pushed him with all her strength over the parapet. Down. Into space.
I found only two enjoyable things on this earth, whose every door was open to meet. My whip over the world and Karen Andre.
He had a platinum gown made for her, and she wore it on her naked body. And when it burned her shameless skin, she laughed like the pagan she is, and he kissed the burns, wild like a tiger.
We had renounced all material concerns, with all their consequences: pride, selfishness, ambition, the desire to rise above our fellow men. We're going to devote ourselves to our spiritual values. We're going to leave the city and live in some modest community. We're going to be like everyone else.
I had full confidence my business acumen would have prevented the crash had Faulkner lived.
I guess it's possible that the letter was forged, but it's not probable.
Herr Faulkner shrugged and said lightly, "Oh, commit suicide." Herr Whitfield looked at him and said, very slowly, "If you do, be sure to make a good job of it."
Faulkner never thought of things as right or wrong. To him it was only you can or you can't. He always could. To me it was only he wants or he doesn't.
But do you think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her, but she loved Faulkner. That is her only proof.
Attention of the court.
The defendant will rise and face the jury. The jury will rise and face the defendant. Mr. Foreman, do you have a verdict?
Yes.
What say you?
Your Honor, we find the defendant guilty.
This is outrageous. We'll be filing an appeal.
There'll be no appeal, Stevens. Ladies and gentlemen, in truth, the sentence you have placed upon me is irrelevant. I will not be here to serve it. I place my faith in the Honor Faulkner.
All rise.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time through this process. Court is now dismissed.
She shouldn't have been convicted.
Every bit of evidence against her was circumstantial.
They only convicted her because you made them dislike her.
I presented the evidence, Mr. Stevens. The jury based their verdict on what they felt to be the truth.
The truth? What does that word even mean anymore?
Well, I suppose it's all a matter of perception and is based entirely on our own biases, or in this case, the jury's.
Miss Flint, can I ask you a personal question? Do you believe that Miss Unger is guilty?
Of course she's guilty. Guilty of fraud and theft, and certainly guilty of possessing one of the more unique moral codes that I've ever encountered. Guilty of murder? Well, I suppose the only people that will ever truly know that are Carrie and Andre and Bjorn Faulkner.
Good evening, Miss Flint.
Good evening, Mr. Stevens.